Namaste all, and welcome again to Evenings with Sraddhalu. He will be continuing with the record of yoga, and today's subject is flowering of Siddhis. There will also be a number of questions that he will address. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste, Narad. Happy to see you always, and thank you for the introduction. We are continuing with the topic of our study of the record of yoga, and particularly at this point, the Siddhis. But before we proceed, I wanted to touch upon a few things. There have been a few emails or requests asking for how to send questions. If you're watching live, you can type in the chat box. Otherwise, you can send your questions by email to the email ID integralstudies.in@gmail.com. We have also a special announcement for all viewers. I'm reading out the text which is sent to me by email. As an offering to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for Sri Aurobindo's birthday, 15th August, the transcription team of Shanta, Rinke, Anita, Srivalli, Monica, and Shiva has uploaded Evenings with Sraddhalu series transcripts up to 155. We hope to catch up on the backlog soon. From 136 onwards, it is in the new format with auto translation widget enabled. And the old transcripts will be uploaded in this format as well. So I've put the link in the description box for this. It is on the website of integralstudies.in. You will find there the list of all the transcripts of these sessions. And on top to the right, there is a little widget. You can drop down and pick any language and it will translate to that language. So for those of you who were unhappy that we didn't have it in many languages, at least on the text, you can read in the language of your choice. And at the bottom left, there is a little box, which is a search box. And you can type any keyword and it will find among these transcripts that keyword. If you search for Tesla, you'll find 3 or 4 talks which have the word Tesla in it. Most of these have been, and that's the transcription team, has been proofreading also. So wording should be accurate. And eventually, when all of them are available, you'll be able to use it for anything easily. So I want to express my deep thanks and gratitude for the whole team which has been working. We have also one question from Sergei. Please include translations into other languages. And this is, I think, with the translated text which appears while you're watching the video. There, it's a little different. Immediately after the session, for about 24 hours, typically 48 hours, it's only available in the original language, in English. But after about 48 hours, you can click on the button to show the subtitles, closed captions. And then in the options, you can pick the automatic translation into any language that Google will do by itself, which may not be as accurate as these transcripts and the translation that comes from the transcripts. But that's easy to see as subtitles in languages while you're watching the video. But they're activated only after about 2 days. So as such, I have to do nothing. It's automatically done by YouTube. So that's also available, but you have to wait a couple of days. There was one question from Luke. In the 3 previous Evenings with Sraddhalu detailing with Siddhis, you have referred to the 6 limbs of the integral yoga, plus a preparation before them. In which of Sri Aurobindo's writings are these elements described? So the whole text of the framework of the integral yoga you will find in Sri Aurobindo's fat book, The Synthesis of Yoga. And the main structure of the integral yoga itself is in part 4. Part 1 is an introduction. Introduction is a 5-chapter introduction, which is part 0, you may say. Part 1, 2, and 3 are the yoga of works, yoga of knowledge, and yoga of love. Part 4 is the integral yoga proper. And chapter 10 within part 4 particularly is titled The Elements of Perfection, where Sri Aurobindo lists out these 6 limbs. But the chapters before give the broad structure or approach of the practice of the yoga. And there the purification aspect is developed over 2 or 3 chapters. Subsequent to the description of these 6 limbs, which is in this chapter 10, are the actual means of practice of the limbs which follow in exact sequence in the following chapters. The entire structure of the integral yoga is presented sequentially. I'm highlighting this a little bit because it will be a topic of a discussion maybe a month or 2 from now, where some people have tried to confuse you by saying he wrote something different from what he practiced, etc. That is not true. What he writes is exactly the sequence of the framework of the integral yoga. And we will see then, maybe 2 months from now, why these people are spreading these false stories and what is the agenda behind to harm Sri Aurobindo's message. There is also, if you're interested, for Luke and others who might want to delve deeper into these limbs, we had, as part of the evening series, we had discussed the framework and practice of the integral yoga, and that begins from the EWS 82 till 107, and I've put a link for that for the playlist for those of you who are interested. So we will now dive into the text itself. You will recall that so far we had looked at the framework of the Siddhis, 8 Siddhis, 2 of them of knowledge, 3 of power, and 2 which are of the body, 3 which are of the body itself. So making in all for 8 Siddhis. That text having read, we found a different text now, which was the focus, where Sri Aurobindo goes much more into detail of each Siddhi and explains the rationale, how they work. And in the very process of explaining how they work, you find he also gives you the steps and the means by which you can open to and develop these siddhis once you understand the method of the integral yoga. People read all this and say, oh, but he doesn't tell you which mantra to say. He doesn't tell you which center to concentrate on. He doesn't tell you what practices to do. No, precisely the method of the yoga, integral yoga particularly, is to directly enter into the experience by holding your awareness on the thing itself and build from experience to experience. So this is part of the discussion you will find in that previous series of the evening's talks from 82 onwards, where there's one topic which was called the direct method. There we have discussed the method itself. And so as you read Sri Aurobindo's description, you discover the method itself that he reveals. Last time we read particularly the 2 siddhis of knowledge, prakamya and vyapti. You will notice the sequence he has followed here is slightly different. And as I find, the sequence here is much more aligned to the way the practice naturally can unfold, starting with what is more easy for most people. The rationale behind all these siddhis was very simple, which we had read earlier, that all existence, which is essentially of divine consciousness, the Sat, sheer existence, is utterly conscious. And the divine consciousness everywhere knows itself and everything as itself. It in us also knows itself and everything as itself and in itself. So in some sense, the more you align with the divine consciousness and join with it, its spontaneous self-knowledge tends to become yours. The way it acts in the world spontaneously by its movement of power tends also to align in your consciousness and becomes yours. This is, at a very essential level, the whole movement. Therefore, inevitably, in the growth of your consciousness Godward, especially in the framework of integral yoga, which does not abandon the world, but seeks to manifest God in world, the manifesting aspect of the divine then organizes itself in you and works through you, which means inevitably these siddhis will unfold. In the way we have approached it so far, we have always tried to see the siddhis from the point of view of what is already latent in us. And the last time, particularly when we have gone through in detail with prakamya and vyapti, we looked at it in this way, that there is already something. How do you amplify that, intensify, direct, and then step by step deepen and develop? And if you have experimented with this, you will find already that based on what we discussed last time, something of this ability functions. Not very organized and not very regular, but it's there, and it's not such a big deal. In the text we had read earlier, there were 4 criteria we had to follow to ensure that we do not misuse the Siddhis. And one of the most important ideas there was that it is a natural functioning. It is the functioning of nature, perhaps a higher nature. Nevertheless, nature in us and in itself does not require even a spiritual development. But as part of the spiritual development, that awakening of higher nature would inevitably lead to this. And Sri Aurobindo used the phrase that we should see this as the flowering out of the normal working of nature. And it is this word that I want to catch. Why flowering out? And it's very suggestive. In the structure of the flower, there are many petals. The petals are also layered. So there is the outer layer of petals which open out, and then an inner layer which can then open, and then a still deeper inner layer, and still deeper all the way to the bud, which then fully opens and reveals itself. In that sense, our human development often takes this form. The most outer parts, the most crude and coarse, first have to develop sufficiently so that something of the inner can begin to come forward and has a flexible enough and conscious enough basis through which to act. When that comes forward, it infuses itself into those coarser layers, refines them, lifts them up, and prepares for the next layering of petals, capacities, faculties, powers to start flowering out, which then infusing in all the other layers raises, refines them, and so on. So it is natural for us, as part of this process and this sequence, in the flowering out of your nature, that these powers also will flower out. We have so far dwelt on 2 powers, especially last time when we went in depth. The prakasha of the senses, the luminosity of the mind consciousness amplified, turned through contact of mental sensation and mental awareness, leading to the senses perception. This was the process of the prakamya, and we saw the sequence Sri Aurobindo suggests through first objects, scenes, and then events, but also things which are at a distance or hidden at first, and then things which belong to other planes, and then things which belong to the past and the future, etc. And then from there, the perception of the present state of mind, feelings, and sensations of others, particularly their thoughts and feelings, or their past or their future. And the rationale for how this happens and the stages through which this happens we discussed last time. And this was prakamya, which is a more directed, personalized, narrowed direction of effort. This, as a starting point, is easier because you're directing an effort and you need to start with an effort. Then we saw Vyapti, where to each form of this prakamya, there was a corresponding form of Vyapti, where your consciousness spontaneously, in a kind of an identity, in a kind of a wide opening, in a kind of interpenetration, receives the imprints from others, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and also at the same time is able to imprint itself into their thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And this becomes the process of Vyapti. And by this, we had seen that he says it is possible by Vyapti to communicate anything we have in our system. It's quite a big framework. Our system, not just our mind, the entire system, anything you have, you can communicate. And then he gives you examples, thoughts, feelings, powers, etc. So the etc. is more important, which we didn't touch upon last time, which took examples of thoughts, feelings, and powers communicated. And we can then communicate these things to anybody, to others, to another. And if he's able to seize and hold it, he can make it his own and use it. So this becomes the proper method by which any teacher of anything, even intellectual knowledge, or any skill of music or art or perception of refinement of poetry or knowledge, literature, anything developed in him can be imprinted in the student by this. And if on the student side the receptivity is there, and if they can seize and hold, and we saw the difference between the two, they can make it their own and use it. Now, if you understand this as the essence of all communication and all teaching, all training, you understand all teaching is really this done indirectly. Then you would change your methodology of teaching by first prioritizing in the student the ability to seize and to hold and to make their own. Okay, think of it this way. That means first within them you will develop the capacity to open and to receive, and then to catch, and then to hold and retain and not lose. Build this capacity, and this student now released in the world will learn everything from everyone without limit. You understand how important this ability is. And this was, in fact, the approach in the Indian educational system going back many thousand years, especially in the yoga-influenced educational system. I'm sure there would have been those who were more rote-based, inevitably, that's human nature. But wherever there was an attempt to lead to some deeper skill, capacity, or even spiritual experience, the building of the capacity to open and be receptive was often very important, which was one of the reasons why you will see in many of the old stories, the disciple would be first asked to serve the teacher with humility, with love, with affection, with a sense of self-giving and identification, so that they would align and attune over time. And through sustained contact over days, weeks, or even months, there would be an affinity and alignment in which this power of prakamya would directly imprint into the student whatever the teacher holds. And so you understand the rationale for these things. But more importantly, Sri Aurobindo says even the guru uses this ability consciously or unconsciously. And so the etc. is where we come to now. We saw that anything in our system, he says, can be imprinted. So this includes spiritual experiences, states of consciousness, powers of the inner and higher ranges, including the intuitive, including some specialized abilities such as being able to separate in consciousness, in state of awareness, even to stand back in your mind as an observer, or to go out of your body, or even the contact with the psychic presence. And it was in this way that primarily the mother transmitted these experiences and this knowledge to the disciples in the ashram. It was done in many ways, directly, indirectly, but the most direct methods that she used was in the morning darshans, when she saw the entire group of disciples from the balcony, infused in them the necessary force, or imprinted the state of consciousness required, and they had to do nothing except open and be receptive, and particularly seize and hold and make their own. That part is still to be done. And the life in the ashram that followed the rest of the day was intended to assist this seize and hold and make yours by integrating in the physical life working process itself. Again, if you catch this idea, you will find this is still available to you today. If you are, well, in the ashram in Pondicherry, you can still receive from her in this way and begin your day in this way. If you're elsewhere, she is still present equally wherever you are in the world, and you can begin your day in this way with the darshan, with receiving her consciousness in you, and then working to integrate it during the day. But this was, as I gave this as one example. Then there were other methods, of course, more direct, where she would physically bless and infuse or draw out the psychic imprint. You remember, anything, communicate anything in the system, well, she would draw out the psychic being and the psychic influence to the front. So there's a narration of one of the girls then, who after the meditation would get up and suddenly she would feel weak and giddy, unstable, as if with vertigo. And when she complained to the mother, every time she gets up from meditation, mother said, well, I'm drawing out your psychic being all the way to the surface. If you suddenly get up and jump out with a jerk, you will naturally lose that balance. So you have to come out slowly and make that effort to integrate. But the thing is, it was done so easily, so spontaneously, that people just said, oh, I feel good, and never recognized the need to make that effort. So in many cases, it was just allowed to fall apart, to fall back without anything. And it was the mother's effort to not to do it by a formal way, because then people catch the formality and forget the experience itself. So I'm elaborating a little bit on the etc., which we did not touch too much. And he explained also how every thought, feeling, sensation, or other movement of consciousness creates waves or currents, which carry it out into the world consciousness enters anywhere that anyone is receptive. And our own habitual thoughts, at least, and feelings, at least half of them are such unconscious borrowings. So this was our discussion last time. And Narad, yes, Narad reminded me that the mother had the soup ceremony. This was a very special event which lasted for the first 2 years of the ashram's formal establishment, and 1926 through 1928 or so. And at that point, the numbers were very few. If I remember right, they were less than 30. They would be called to the soup room, which is just behind the reception now. And in that hall, the mother would, in the soup vessel, she would infuse the higher consciousness, take it in a bowl, then one cup of soup, herself sip it, and then give the soup bowl to the person to drink. And for each person, it was different. And what she would do there, she would embody in herself one of the overmental deities, which she was trying to connect to that particular person. So depending on who came in front, she knew who it was that she was trying to connect the person to. These are the Vedic gods. And she would invoke, embody, and taking the soup, infuse into soup that power. And as the person drank it, it was then used as the vehicle for the physical infusion of that consciousness into the body tissue itself. Now, this is quite an extraordinary thing. If you understand the principle of this Vyapti, you're using now a physical medium to complete to the most material level, even down to the physical cells of the body. The method in principle could be used for any low-grade communications, which is what you see in various forms of magic, where also they may use things to drink, etc., for transmitting certain forces. But unfortunately, it's a principle which is very general. Here she was bringing down the overmental gods and imprinting in them. This went on for about 2 years, and they were all having extraordinary experiences, when at some point Sri Aurobindo indicated that it might take the whole effort in a different direction and create even one of the world's greatest religions. And a decision was taken by them to dissolve this and to aim directly at the supramental, bypassing this domain of the overmental beings. And so mother, she says, 2 years of work, she dissolved in 2 hours. And all these people in whom she had built these links suddenly stopped having those experiences. Again, highlighting the fact that they might have thought, oh, I have grown so much, even if mother worked in me, now I am so. When she dissolved the link, they fell back to what they were, because they were still the vehicles in which she was infusing. And what she infused, and even the deities that she connected them to, the moment she dissolved it, they lost it. I've shared here this incident. We actually had occasion to interview one of the persons. Most of them have passed on when we started these interviews. And we found one person who was still in the body. And he was a weird guy. The rest of his life, he remained weird. And he said, and we interviewed him on audio recorded on the cassette, where he said, when mother was doing this, I was becoming so powerful. And then he says, I became so powerful that the mother got jealous, so she removed my power. And that shows you the lack of readiness of the person. But more than that, it shows you the mother's capacity to infuse despite your lack of readiness. And this is something so extraordinary in the annals of the spiritual history of humanity. We have not had this kind of an extraordinary capacity to infuse even in somebody who's so crude, a capacity way beyond anything that he could have conceived of even, and make him a vehicle for that. Of course, from the point she dissolved it, the fellow fell back to his cruder type, which is what we met later on. So the teacher and the guru habitually use this power of Vyapti, which is far more effective than speech or writing. But all men use or suffer it unconsciously. So if you are a teacher, again, I'm taking it in a very general way, even transmitting mental knowledge or emotive experiences in the realm which need not even be spiritual, well, if you develop this capacity of transmission, you will be far more effective as a teacher And I will share one experience which I had. This was with this lady called, she was an extraordinary person in Delhi. She was the head of one of these institutions, Indic institutions. The name will come back. And we had invited her for something. And at some point, we did the discussion being finished, she began to narrate her experience of visiting the temple on the southern tip of India, absolute extreme, where Swami Vivekananda meditated. She said she sat there and then she began to narrate. And as she was narrating, her voice grew softer and softer and softer. We could barely hear. It's as if as she was growing softer, our consciousness was being drawn out to listen more carefully. And she was not only drawing us in, but she was infusing into us what she felt. And all of us who were listening felt this thrill in the body that she had experienced. And we all knew that everyone else was experiencing it. That was such an extraordinary thing. I said, wow, if she can do that, I should be able to do this also. Well, it was a natural aspiration to be able to transmit an experience like this, where nothing in the words she spoke really gave any clue to the experience. It's the way she held it and transmitted it, and that she was doing it consciously. I said, wow, this should be possible. If this is possible, we can do so much more with it. So, just to show you how powerful it can be when you are conscious also, and you can transmit in this way consciously. So with this, we close the discussion of the first two, Prakamya and Vyapti, which are the Siddhis of knowledge. We now come to the three Siddhis of power. Again, we have read this before. We're going to read a different text now. Again, a slightly different description, but much more detailed. And in this, you will find the method also being obvious. In the first time that we read it, he had described Vashita, Aishwarya, and Ishita. Vashita is the power to project your consciousness, to grip into you, let's say a kind of a hypnosis, or project your will to compel something or someone. Then Aishwarya was the not that kind of concentrated, but a general will put out, which works itself out through circumstances. And the third, which was, so to say, the peak of this whole development, which was Ishita, where simply the fact that you need it creates a ripple and evokes in the circumstances the outcome. So instead of following this sequence, Sri Aurobindo puts the second and third first, and the first he puts last, and you'll see why. Again, remember, this is more practice-oriented, so there's a natural unfolding in this sequence, in the flowering. So we look at Aishwarya first. The link for the text of today also I have put same as last time. I'll read first the text and then we will go in detail. Aishwarya. Aishwarya is effectiveness of the will, capital W, acting on object or event without the aid of physical means. You are applying your will on an object or on an event, except there is no physical means. What does that mean? Normally, you are always applying your will by physical means. You're giving an order, hey, do this. Can you help me? Please help me. I beg of you to help me. That's also your will asserting on somebody else, isn't it? Or sometimes it is more gentle. You fall, you reach out, help. Somebody comes or doesn't, or many people come. But still there was an outreach with physical speech or reaching out of a hand or some demand, some message sent, etc., which had some transmission of your will. Now remove all that. You fall. Nobody even sees you, perhaps. But the same will reaching out without the physical means, people would turn and say, oh, the person fell, I will reach and help. Well, at least physically, it's visible that you've fallen. You're sitting here, you're thirsty, and you want water. You could say, hey, do you have water? Can I please take one sip? Or I'll pay you money, can I buy a glass or a bottle of water? You have no physical movement at all, You have the need and you put out a will for somebody who's next to you who has a bottle of water. And spontaneously, the person takes out his bottle of water and before drinking asks, would you like some? So that would be an example of non-physical outreach of the will. Or you would simply feel the need, and this would be the Ishita. You feel the need and the person spontaneously takes out his bottle and offers it to you. You never even applied an intention on him. So in Aishwarya, you're applying an intention. Aishwarya is effectiveness of the will acting on object or event without the aid of physical means. How does it work? Now he gives you 4 methods, and they represent 4 degrees of perfection of the power itself. It may work, 1, by pressure or tapas of the Chaitanya straight on the object that has to be affected. 2, by pressure or tapas of Chaitanya on the Prakriti, either the general world Prakriti or Prakriti in the object itself, to bring about directly the result intended. We'll elaborate on each of these. 3, by pressure on the Prakriti to bring about circumstances that will compel indirectly the result intended. 4, without pressure, by a mere thought, that is will, the ajna, command, or ajnanam of the Ishvara, which Prakriti automatically obeys. The last is the highest power of Aishwarya and its supreme Siddhi. For here, Chit and Tapas become one as in the will of God himself. So 4 degrees in which your consciousness and the intention concentrated in your consciousness are initially fragmented, they're different, they're operating independently and increasingly united until in the 4th, they become as if the working of the will of the divine. So remember again the rationale for all these siddhis. This is how the divine acts in the world. You being separated and fragmented from the divine, you have to use indirect and fragmented means. When in consciousness you approach the divine more and more, you begin to align with the divine means of working out its will. So really, strictly speaking, nothing unusual. It's a natural working, flowering out. But let's look at the 4 degrees. In all 4, it's the effectiveness of the will acting on the object or event without physical means. Now, he is making this distinction object or event. And it's important to understand initially the working of the will is easier on an object, later on events. The working on an object would be, for example, this outcome. I want water, or I want this object to be taken, placed elsewhere. I want this work to be done, etc. So there's a particular object and outcome that you are aiming for. But on an event, it is much more complex because it's not one object, it's not one person, it's a combination of many different forces. And the event itself could be intended in a very general way. For example, Sri Aurobindo could put the will for India to become free. Now, this is such a broad action that you do not even need to worry about through what means, who will be the persons who will work for it, what will be the method by which they will work or succeed, what will be the method by which the British will withdraw. You do not have to concern yourself with any of these. And this would be the proper working in the highest working of the Aishwarya. That you put the will for India to be free. And then the will itself now goes about and does its work. How is what we will understand now. This is too broad. Let's go to something more simple. We don't want it to rain. So you put a will, and if you look at the working of weather, it's very complex. There are winds coming from different directions. There is humidity rising from different parts. They patch. There's a cooling, heating, various winds. They join in a way. Suddenly a cloud forms or it gets blown away. or there's no cloud for it to precipitate, or there is a cloud but it doesn't precipitate. Very complex. And normally, even with the best supercomputers, you don't predict more than 3 days ahead. But here is a will which would actually intervene, and those processes would be suitably modified. How? You don't care. You don't have to worry about, hey, this atom should move there, that wind stream should change direction. You don't have to go to that. You put the overall intention of the will, and it works itself out through the specifics of the means. So that's what he will explain. So Narad, you can just, do you want to say what your question? We'd like to hear you.
I had heard that Sri Aurobindo actually put the words in Churchill's mouth. Or
Yes,
did he actually just work on the events?
both. It's a very good example. During the Second World War, you will recall Sri Aurobindo wrote this in a letter initially, that he watched the whole unfolding of the war without taking sides. But once it was clear that the Axis powers represented an Asuric outcome, that's when he took a side and put his will. And he says the moment he put his will, and this was, I think, the Battle of Dunkirk, where suddenly the tide of the war changed. And from the point where it seemed as if the Allied powers were being wiped out, suddenly they held ground and pushed back against the Axis powers. Just that one intervention. So now when he puts a will like this, which is a general will for the reversal of those circumstances, that will operates through individuals who are open. It finds individuals. It finds out the specifics of how those individuals can or cannot act. For example, somebody who's strong, it gives to him an amplification of his power of fortitude. For someone who is attentive to details, it awakes in him the perception, oh, here's a weak point, we can aim there. For somebody who has a particular special skill, it gives him the special aim of that skill. As he shoots, he hits his target more quickly, more easily. All these specifics are worked out by the general will. Sri Aurobindo himself does not have to concern about it. Unlike what we will see later in the Vashita, where there is a more direct focused action on a person or their capacity. Here it's a general will which has been put. So yes, Sri Aurobindo was working on the circumstances generally like this, but on occasion, there was also the specific individual that he picked as an instrument. In this case, he mentioned that Churchill was a very good instrument. And so when he inspired Churchill, Churchill was the point of contact through whom the force would act on the troops who were on the border, who would listen to Churchill's broadcasts, and the force would act, and as the words were spoken, they would feel hope, strength, courage, etc., which on their own they would not have got. So that was Sri Aurobindo's force working. Naturally, because it's his force working, and Churchill is an instrument with a mind and a skill and power of oratory, Sri Aurobindo's formation of words and thoughts also naturally took shape inside Churchill's consciousness. So the way we will speak in human terms, we will say, oh, Sri Aurobindo put the words in his mouth. Yeah, kind of. It's not exactly like that. It's not as if Churchill becomes a puppet and mouths without knowing. It's Sri Aurobindo's consciousness entering his mind, seizing upon his power of oratory, lifts it up, infuses it with force, and naturally gives to it phrasing forms which are natural to Sri Aurobindo's consciousness, but to which Churchill is sufficiently familiar or capable of expressing. And so you will find those very interesting similarities between some of Sri Aurobindo's early writings, certain phrases he uses, and Churchill's own as he speaks, and which, of course, we also know the mother confirms this, that every evening that inspiration was working. But it does not mean, again, that Sri Aurobindo has to be sitting, oh, he's going to make a broadcast, it's going to start in 5 minutes, and I have to concentrate while he's speaking. It's not like that. That would be closer to the Vashita method. Here in Aishwarya, he puts the general will and power on Churchill in and around him and through him. Whenever Churchill speaks, he is now held in that power and it acts. Whenever Churchill opens to the help, the power acts more effectively, more intensely. And so it also acts in Churchill's general life without any specific intention held, except perhaps the general intention for Sri Aurobindo to hold Churchill in his protection. So there's a very unusual incident in Churchill's life, which he narrates, himself narrates, that his driver had opened the door to the car. And as you know, in the British system, the driver sits on the right and the main passenger enters from the left side of the car. So he had held the door open. Churchill would normally have walked in and sat down on the left. But unusually, Churchill hesitates. Door is open. It's the most odd thing to do. He hesitates, goes around the car, goes to the right side where nobody's holding the door open, opens it and sits on the right side, which he never did. So now the driver, he thinks it's odd, but he goes and sits on the right side also. That's where he's driving. And as they're driving, driver is on the right, Churchill is on the right. And suddenly, a bomb falls close enough that the force of the explosion lifts the entire car and would have turned it upside down. But because both of them were sitting on the right, and Churchill says, my meat saved it. His body is very heavy. So the whole car actually rose, but the right side being extra heavy, it fell back again on the right and continued driving. Had he been on the left, the car would have flipped upside down. Now, this is a kind of detail which Sri Aurobindo does not have to monitor and follow. Oh, there's going to be a bomb in 24 minutes from now. It's going to be like this on this location. So you don't have to do that. He has put a general will for the protection. The will works itself out in the specifics. Churchill being a good instrument, and this is a good example of how receptive he was. He did something so weird, so unusual, but without thinking, without questioning. He felt it had to be done, he did it. There's also this incident which is narrated when he was on the battlefield, on the ground. While the bullets, bombs were falling, he was told, well, he would stand there and he would continue. He had the maps in front and he would be giving orders, and everybody else, they would hear the whizzing of a bomb and they would duck. He didn't care. So he was asked, aren't you afraid you might get hit? He says, no, I have a mission to fulfill. And he says, I know that I'm protected. As long as I have to do this, I will be protected. Where does this knowledge come from? The deep conviction by which he's not afraid of a bullet or a bomb falling on him. That made for a good receptive instrument. That even the conviction of the protection, he could feel and live by it with faith. If within him there was the faith, yeah, I feel that, but can I trust it? Is it God? Is it not God? If you start mentalizing and questioning and allow the doubts, that weakens your ability to receive. So he was a good instrument. He got it, he knew it, he held it, and so he could be so effective and protected. I give this elaboration in some detail because this applies to all of us. When you ask for the help, it is by this power of Aishwara, generally, let's say, as a general power, that the help is given to you from the Divine Mother, from Sri Aurobindo, from God, whatever way you relate to the divine consciousness, the help is given, then your opening, your receptivity, your faith, your ability to contain, receive, etc., they make more effective or less effective. Or another letter of Sri Aurobindo I draw upon where he says that the help is always given, but when you call for help, the help can be more effective because in the act of calling you open and there's the action, that the receptivity which comes with it. If you don't call, you're saying, hey, I need help, but I'm too busy. The help may be there, but you're holding it back with your own closed poise of consciousness. The act of calling makes you open to the source of the help, and so the effectivity. But it is this very power. Except now we are operating in this power from an individual poise upon the world or upon events or objects around us. So first we observe the distinction acting on object or event without the aid of physical means. You could combine the two. You could have physical means with this power. So this is how one would see Churchill's speeches. inspired by Sri Aurobindo. So Sri Aurobindo to Churchill, there's no physical means. From Churchill to those listening to him, there is a physical means of the radio transmission, or sometimes even transcripts appearing in newspapers. But still, the power is being transmitted through those words, and at least from Sri Aurobindo, without even the need for those words. But being an effective instrument, Churchill felt that he was protected, that he was helped, he was guided. A similar thing one can say that Teilhard de Chardin, when he had his ideas of higher levels of consciousness, but from within the Christian framework, he was conscious. He said, these are not my ideas. I know I'm picking them up from someone else, from the larger cosmos. He was conscious of that. These are generally the more effective instruments because they're conscious and so they can be open. When you're not conscious, you cannot be open consciously. You're still an instrument, but not as effective. And that's why becoming conscious and opening consciously makes all the difference. So this will is acting on the object and on event. How? So 4 degrees of specialized action to less and less specialized, more and more free, more and more spontaneous. That's the sequence. So first, by pressure or tapas of the Chaitanya, straight on the object that has to be affected. So there's a pressure of the Chaitanya. Chaitanya is your active awareness. That awareness is directed straight on this object. Between you and that object, there is nothing in between. If your consciousness is spread out over 20 objects, and you try to assert by your consciousness the will, well, it's going to be fragmented or dispersed. You want an effect on an object, it has to become an exclusive focus. Okay? So, pressure of the will of the Chaitanya acting straight on the object. Now, Sri Aurobindo is really, really precise. So, straight on the object, not deviated, not mixed, not floundering, not dispersed. Straight on the object. This has many implications. I have mentioned this in passing in an earlier part of this discussion. When you actually go to a place or when you actually have a normal intention, you're not conscious that there are many parts within you which have sometimes even contradictory intentions. So let's say you want to seek help from someone. You're going to ask, well, would you please help me, whatever it is you've decided to do. There's a part in you that's hesitating. Should I ask? Would it be right? And then there's a part that says, yeah, but I shouldn't have to ask. Another part that says, yeah, but I'm desperate. I want to ask. Another part that says, I know I can ask, but very likely he will refuse. What will happen if he refuses? I'm going to feel bad. All these different things are pulling and pushing it in different directions. So when you go to ask, the energies are scattered and even contrary to the outcome that you seek. Because they are all cross-connected, the actual energy of the will or intention is also that much weaker, ineffective, dispersed, etc. Now, set aside, remember, we are not going to do physical means. So you put an intention for an outcome. Let's say, I don't want the rain to happen tomorrow for such and such a function. Oh, it shouldn't rain. Oh, it shouldn't rain. What if it rains? If it rains, oh, I must have a backup plan. I must do this. You have so many different thoughts going all over the place, and one little thought that says, oh, please, it should not rain. Consider how much energy is being lost in that dispersed wallowing in fear, worry, and other thoughts. Now, reverse this. Consciously direct all your awareness to that one thing. It should not rain tomorrow. When you're aiming now for a specific outcome, still, it's too big an outcome. What are you aiming at? Well, it's a big sky. It's a big weather unfolding. The whole of tomorrow, I don't want it to rain. Or is it, or tomorrow we have this particular event from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., during which time it should not rain. So narrow it down. Narrow your focus. Make it as precise as possible. So Mother gives this advice generally when she says, when you make a prayer, it has several components. So there has to be an emotive component. It should rise on the crest of emotion, she says. That's when the vital energy, enthusiasm comes. But also she says it should be clearly formulated in thought. And then the third component which makes it effective is it should rise from the psychic aspiration itself. So we're going to, let's take these three as indicators. Okay, so it comes from deep within you. It's not just, hey, I want, it's convenient for me. It comes from a deep need. Remember, the closer you get to the self, well, the more effective it will be, the more natural it will be in the way the self works. So let's start with a case where there is a genuine deep need that comes from deep within you as an aspiration, from as close to the soul as possible, or at least aligned to the soul's aspiration. And so it rises, and then there is the crest of emotion, which gives an emotional energy, aligns your content of heart and life force to this aspiration. And then with the mind to formulate precisely what is needed. And this then as a will goes, and Sri Aurobindo uses the word pressure. But he says pressure or tapas. Now this tapas is extremely important. We'll elaborate on this. But this pressure of the will or tapas of the will, of the Chaitanya, of your consciousness, straight on the object. So let's say you have now got everything straight and aligned. There's no part in you that says, hey, but what if it doesn't happen? Will it work? Can I rely on it? It's whole. There's no part in you that's questioning, doubting, and even contradicting in the request. Pressure of the Chaitanya or tapas of the Chaitanya. So here, remember, it's the effectiveness of the will. And tapas is literally heat, translated as heat of concentration of gathered will. Now, this is something very specific in the yoga tradition, and we'll have to describe a little bit the experience and you'll catch easily what is meant. When you concentrate, you feel this gathered awareness, narrowing, narrowing, narrowing until it's exclusively on whatever it is you concentrate. But notice in the act of gathering and narrowing, there's a pressure and a kind of heat of the focus, intensification of the focus. Like a laser beam, your light scattered in a normal bulb of, let's say, 20 watts. You narrow it, gather, compress it into a narrow beam, which is 1 millimeter thin, and 20 watts, 1 millimeter thin will probably cut through steel. But in that gathering is the intensification. This intensification by compression, by gathered focus of concentration and amplification of the will's intensity. This is called tapas. It is this concentrated, densified focus, which is the tapas of the creative power by which the divine forms the universe. You see, in the way the modern science describes the universe emergence as a big bang. But what is the bang but an extreme compression which is released from compression to blow out? It doesn't matter whether that's the principle or not. The point is, gathered extreme intensification, compressed, has the potency and power to push through, break through. Just as the laser beam, if we take the analogy of the laser, if it represents your mind scattered energies of 20 watts, now narrowed into a 1 millimeter beam, will cut through steel. This gathering, intensification, and densification of the force, the will, the consciousness, and the pressure is what makes it break through any resistance. So, pure concentration of mind. It's not just mind, it's the intensity of the consciousness gathered in the mind. This intensity of consciousness gathered is tapas. So yes, concentration is a form of tapas, but it's not just that. It's more than that. The content of it is not merely mental concentration. So it may work by pressure or tapas of the Chaitanya. So consciousness puts a general pressure. I want this to happen. Whenever you take a position in life for work, let's say you are now head, we're going to use a lot of examples of this kind which relate to our daily life. You're a project head. You are the organizer for a particular function or an event, and there are many people who are answerable to you. And you have an intention with which you approach. I'm going to make this happen. This has to come out in a particular way. That's the general intention and the general pressure in which your consciousness is gathering and pushing things. When you interact with your team, there is implicit in the team and your relationship with the team, the pressure of the direction you want them to move. Suppose you came to the room and sat down and said, hey, let's get this thing done. It'll be nice that we all do it. Okay, go ahead, all of you do what you like. There's no pressure. You come there, within you is this purposefulness. And you say, well, we're going to do this. It's going to happen. Now you see already your language, your form, your body language, the tone, the force you put, all these changes, and they are transmitters or they express this pressure which you are putting with your intention. On the other side, the person who's working in your team might feel too much pressure. They may say, oh, this boss is demanding too much, is pushing too much. I can't keep up with his pace or with his rapidity or with his demands of precision. I don't want to be part of this team. Or if he's a good instrument, he'll say, wow, under this boss, I can do so much. I'm normally capable of doing this much work, but this person, he puts so much energy, pressure, that I'm able to do 10 times more. It's so nice working with you. This pressure. How do you reduce it to words? You can say, oh, life force pressure, mind pressure. No, essentially it is tapas, of consciousness gathered, intensified. Yes, it also acts through mind, it acts through life force, it acts through other things. But it is pressure or tapas of the consciousness, Chaitanya, straight on the object that has to be affected. So here you're precisely directing to that object, to that cloud, no rain, to this person, get up and move, to this outcome, no accident, or the arrow should hit the mark. Let's say you're even doing something like this. You're throwing a javelin. You're shooting an arrow with a bow. Implicit is also this pressure of tapas. It has to hit that part. And the more you're gathered, the more likely it's going to be accurate. You look at some of these people who are on the horse riding. They shoot an arrow and it hits straight. There is no way you can consciously control the horse's rhythm precisely that at that moment it will be aligned in a particular way. It's impossible unless there's a whole alignment of the will, and the moment of release and even the pointing of the arrow is all done by some deeper power within you that knows more than your conscious layer. What do you do consciously? Hold that intention of the pressure or tapas, and the rest works out through your own vehicle, through the horse. You're guiding the horse with your tapas and pressure, and the arrow, you guide the arrow, even so to say, to its mark. So here's a very precise narrow focus. Okay, so it may work by pressure or tapas of Chaitanya straight on the object that has to be affected. Now we go to a less narrowed effort. 2. It may work by pressure or tapas of Chaitanya on the prakriti to bring about directly the result intended. So not on the object, but on nature around the object. Now, in the parenthesis, he puts either the general world prakriti or prakriti in the object itself to bring about directly the result intended. Now let's take an example of a patient who's unwell. So as a doctor, you're desperate to save the patient. You're doing everything you can. It's a emergency situation, bleeding, etc. With your will, this has to stop. The heart has to beat. The bleeding has to stop. You do everything you can, of course, with physical means. But still the intention and the pressure is there. But here you're doing something more now. Let's say we have crisis has passed. The patient has to heal. Will he survive? So often at this point, touch and go, doctor says, we don't know. The next 24 hours will decide everything. What's happening in those next 24 hours? So this pressure or tapas, which you can put, and now you have no physical means, you've done everything possible physically. You put on the nature of the circumstances. The 2 things, world prakriti, world nature, or prakriti in the object itself. Now in this case, we would focus on the body of the person and the nature of that person and the body there. This person has to become healthy, has to recover, has to heal. And the pressure is generally on the whole machinery system, consciousness, energy, life force, everything is held in that pressure and tapas. It can be somebody sitting, some family member sitting next to the patient through the night, repeating some mantra or japa for prayers for the person to get well. Now, if it's not mere mechanical prayer, you're wandering, your mind is wandering, and you're just counting beads, and you're holding an intention, and generally in states of desperation, people find themselves with this capacity. You're holding an intention. He has to get well. You do the prayer. The prayer is your way to hold attention, hold focus, and call for the help. Keep up the tapas and the pressure. On what? Person should get well. It's a general action on the nature of the person. Or this is Prakriti object of the object itself, or general world Prakriti. Now, for a broader outcome, a war, you would want an outcome which is, you can't specify one person. You need a much larger action. So you would put a pressure on the larger circumstances, larger nature. This war has to cease. So take a good example of the point where Sri Aurobindo's will reversed the direction of the Second World War. And that would be an action on the world nature, world Prakriti. There is a larger pressure he has already put. And at that time, you remember, he spoke of his 5 dreams, the first 2 of which had been fulfilled, and the other 3 were on the way of being fulfilled. And the largest of them was the next step in human evolution. When Sri Aurobindo says dream, it's his dream. It's not like he's leaning back in his armchair and says, I dream of a day when India will be free. No, he was working for it with his full power and the spiritual power, including this power. So when he is speaking of his dream, and we'll take especially the 5th dream because it's the most long-term, a new step in human evolution, it's not something he's dreaming in a fantasy. It's something he's putting his energy and pressure for. And this is a pressure on the world situation. Now imagine, I'll put it this way experientially, Sri Aurobindo holds the entire globe of the earth in his consciousness, like an embrace. Himself in everything, identified with the whole of it, the whole of nature, of humanity and everything of the earth, including all beings and all processes of nature, all animals, all plants, everything. Earth consciousness and human consciousness in earth consciousness. He's identified with it, and identified with it, he wills this turn and this push. That's the pressure or tapas of Chaitanya on world Prakriti. And from the point he begins to do this, suddenly people start waking up. Hey, what am I doing? Is something I need to do. I don't know why I'm feeling restless. I'm not satisfied with what's happening. I have to do more. And those who are most open, most receptive, first wake up. Others get the pressure, pain of the pressure pushing them. But if he did not do that, the earth's destiny was heading towards complete collapse and self-destruction, as has happened millions of times on so many planets, and even on our earth, in so many local regions, Atlantis and all those stories. But this time he's literally, with his pressure, turned world destiny and set it into a new direction. The outcome of which, rippling on the pressure the tapas built up, unfolding over a few hundred years perhaps. But he has changed world destiny. This was the work of the avatar. So by pressure or tapas of Chaitanya on the Prakriti, either the general world Prakriti or Prakriti in the object itself, to bring about directly the result intended. So again, here he's using the word directly. Both in the first case, straight on the object. Second case, directly the result. Now, you're not straight on the object. You are on the nature of the object, but the result is directly intended. This outcome. In the third case, you're not putting directly, you're putting indirectly. That's the big difference. So in the third case, by pressure on the Prakriti to bring about circumstances which will compel indirectly the result intended. Interesting. I'm tempted to give a more topical example, but let's take the war in Ukraine. Directly, intervention would have been both sides wake up, hey, we have to stop. When they refuse, you work indirectly. So indirectly, you change Prakriti which will compel indirectly the nature. Suddenly the manufacturing stream breaks down. Ships sink. Planes crash. Weapons don't reach the spot. What happens? You don't have a choice. You're compelled to now accept peace. That's how indirectly works. So you will see so many important events took place even in the Second World War, where the sinking of a ship or a submarine or some such triggered a chain of reactions indirectly. And you'd say it was fortuitous. So this third way of working, you're not even applying pressure on the person, and especially if it's a person refusing to change. In the case of the individual that is Hitler, the direct action, if it had acted, he would have suddenly woken up and said, hey, no, this is wrong. I'm doing this wrong. I need to change this. He's not. He's closed. He's refusing. He's fixed on a different track. He's under possession of a different force, whatever the case might be. So at this point, pressure on the Prakriti, again, world Prakriti or Prakriti of the object, to bring about circumstances which will compel indirectly the result intended. And then suddenly things begin to break down, systems break down, communications break down. Suddenly there's a slip somewhere. The message was sent, but the person who was receiving at that moment fell asleep and something was missed. Indirectly, the things got delayed and so on. So compelling the outcome despite the person's resistance or opposition to it. So this is the third method. Now you can see at this point, your intervention on the person is least. I'm going to generalize this to Mother's observation when she said, if only humanity consented to change, then so much could happen rapidly without the pain. But then she says, and if humanity does not consent to change, it will be through, and I quote now the phrase, she says the phrase, it will be through the crashing circumstances that the change will be compelled upon humanity. What is this crashing circumstances? And the changes of those circumstances is what we are seeing today. So many things are happening which compel you to question, is this going to work? Can I continue like this? I have to change whether I like it or not. Someone came and begged and said, listen, you need to make a change in your consciousness. Please do. No, I don't. I'm quite happy with myself. When circumstances start crashing, you say, hey, I have to survive. And you're forced to. So at this point, you see the most powerful, but also because it is indirect, generally because of lack of receptivity on your part, because it is indirect, it is also the most powerful, most compelling. But if you're resisting, then it's also the most painful. And then the fourth, which is most aligned to the divine working, without pressure. So in the first three, everywhere you saw pressure or tapas. Without pressure, by mere thought, that is will. As you think, the formulation of your thought itself becomes the will compelling. The ajna, the command, ajnanam of the Ishwara, it's the command of the Lord, which Prakriti automatically obeys. If you go all the way up in the chain, in the hierarchy of consciousness, well, intermediate, you have a consciousness and then you have nature, and the two are not aligned. You know, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I want to do, but I can't help it. My body is too weak, etc. You have a misalignment of your consciousness intention and the machinery through which it has to act. But as you go up the chain, the gradations of consciousness, the two become more and more aligned until at the highest level, what consciousness becomes in nature. So what consciousness wills, nature flows automatically as the natural outcome. When you align and live in that grade of consciousness, at that point, the mere thought, oh, now it's time, and it starts happening. The closest I remember right now of an example like this is the mother when she describes how she brought down the supramental light and force on earth. And it was on the 29th of February, she says she was in front of this huge golden door, which was preventing the supramental consciousness from flowing down. And then she says, I'm sorry, I'll have to draw from my memory, but the phrasing, the core of the phrasing should be right. She says, I knew and willed in an instant. Knew and willed. This knowledge will unifying is typical of the supramental grade of action. And so she is what she intends. And that thought is the will. That intention is the will. It is the command of the Lord, and nature must obey. That's the nature of that action. And breaks through. The decision made, the consequences follow. But also working from that poise, by the time it reaches the human grade, it goes through all those levels. So I'll give an example of this, which is the 1920. Mother describes how, and we'll read this text perhaps next time. Mother describes how she was with Sri Aurobindo and she suddenly declares India is free. And Sri Aurobindo asks, how does it happen? She says, they went as they came. And she gives this example. She's speaking in the past tense because there it is already done. That will became the action and it's achieved. But from there, nature, Prakriti unfolding, by the time it reaches the material grade, there are many resistances, diversions, influences, all trying to engage with what is now inevitable to happen. So because it's coming from there and it's the command that nature has to follow, no choice there. One way or other, eventually it's going to happen. You can only oppose to delay, you cannot oppose to prevent. So as you saw from that point, 1920, within 2 years, the British came to the negotiating table. India could have become free without partition. But the forces which came in blocked it, delayed it. Eventually, 1947, India becomes free, but with partition because of the forces. Still, it's only delayed. Eventually, partition will go whenever that happens. So an action from that grade has its consequence. Unfolding may go through all kinds of oppositions. Eventually, it will use even what opposes to its end. So, read again. Without pressure. So, there's no strain or stress on your part. Without pressure, by mere thought that is will, the ajna, command, rajnanam, of the Ishvara, Lord, which Prakriti automatically obeys. The last, this fourth, is the highest power of Aishwarya and its supreme Siddhi, perfection. For here, Chit and Tapas, consciousness and the intensification of the will, of energy, become one as in the will of God Himself. Now, this principle is reflected in a very reduced way in our consciousness and our human will, in a very tiny part, in a tiny layer, and even fragmented across many layers. So now if you go backward from fourth to third to second to first of the four ways by which this can work, you see how from the fourth, which is the most complete and spontaneous and inevitable, the third requires a push of a pressure on the Prakriti, but indirectly through circumstances, it will eventually compel, and you don't concern yourself with how. And again, it may take long because it has to work through circumstances. And even if somebody opposes, eventually that opposition will be overcome. You come to the second, you have pressure or tapas of the consciousness on the Prakriti to bring about directly the result intended. Now, it's not working through circumstances, it's working directly on the thing, but through Prakriti, through the nature, through the temperament, through the tendencies innate to the person or those individuals. We'll come to a few examples of that. From there, you come to the first method, by pressure or tapas of the Chaitanya, straight on the object, not through the Prakriti, but on the object. Now, in the precision you gain and the rapidity straight on the object is, of course, more rapid, more precise in the detail, less general in an outcome, but with great precision. When you apply pressure on the nature, it may take longer because nature has to then work indirectly on the object. But you see what happens there, you're changing nature. So let's take the example again of a person. Here is one person who is living his life, lost in his life, busy, And from there, Sri Aurobindo sees this. Let's say there's a call from the person's soul and says, help me, please free me from this stupid mind and the confused heart and the person's obstinate habits. The force comes. If it acts directly on the person suddenly wakes up and says, I don't know. I'm just fed up with everything. I have to change. There's something important I have to do. Let's say the person is too closed to wake up. Now the pressure comes on his nature. Now, what is interesting about nature is all that I was doing earlier in my half zombie state was driven by nature. So when I say, oh, I would rather just sit back and watch a movie, I would rather laze around, I'd rather make more money while the other things can wait. It's a tendency in your nature. Your consciousness has not woken up, or even if it does, nature brings it back to its habit. When you change nature, now I'm doing this, the drive itself now weakens or changes direction. I'm making money, but somehow I feel I'm going to be much more happy if that money I could put to some use which will give me happiness. And now making money becomes less important. Using the money for a specific outcome becomes more important. So you are led. You're driving a car, the car wheel turns by itself. You can't help it. You're compelled by your nature. So the beauty of this action is that as it works, you find yourself carried. You, the consciousness inside, says, I don't know why, but suddenly everything is changing. And nature is taking you. But that is a slightly roundabout, longer route. But if the action is on the nature directly, it is still somewhat rapid. In the third case, it is nature itself will compel indirectly. So in that case, I don't even know why, but suddenly everything changes meaning, everything becomes less interesting, or other things become more interesting, and something starts shifting, and I'm struggling in between. I want to do this, but somehow I don't have the enthusiasm. I don't want to do that, but somehow I find that somehow more interesting. And I, as the person inside, am vacillating between these two tendencies until eventually nature gets fully shaped, and then I find myself, you know what, over the last 2 years, I've changed completely as a person. Earlier, I used to do this, now I can't do that, and now I'm doing this. And I know of a few cases, even in life, you might all know also similar. Maybe you are one of those where, in a case, for example, which I'm remembering, somebody used to love meat. And then suddenly things started shifting, and then he found it nauseous for no reason at all. And the whole turn of his nature changes. What made it happen? The working of the Shakti, of the grace, reshaping his nature. And the person literally feels as if I did nothing, it just happened. So often a lot of work is done in this way, and often on a large scale, especially in large communities, large spaces. And when this kind of work is done, it may take a little longer, but the results are also much more stable and lasting because nature itself has been changed. In the first case, if you change the person's consciousness, but the nature was not enough changed, eventually nature might pull back, push back, going back and forth. And of course, the fourth is the most compelling and inevitable. And it is on this level that Sri Aurobindo has done a lot of the work for humanity. So this is Aishwarya. Obviously, for us to recognize that the method one is often the more easy to begin with. Method two is a modification on the first method where you focus more on changing the nature and circumstances around, and then let the consequence happen through that. Method three will tend to take longer and also will be more difficult for us because we don't know how to really shape nature indirectly. But it is what happens when we unconsciously persist in a will for an outcome. When we have, for example, and from the soul particularly, an aspiration throughout our life. I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to realize this. Sometimes it's very specific. I want to live there and do this and work there in that particular way. We don't know why, but it's there in a sustained way. Eventually, it will happen in some way or other because that sustained will shape events, navigate and guide you to that outcome. So there's one of this very important statements I think Swami Vivekananda made, where he said something to this effect: take a great idea and dedicate yourself to it wholeheartedly with mind and emotions and heart. And day and night, do you think only that, work only for that, and commit your whole life to that, and you'll have the success. So if you take something like this in a very general way, you can see how that tapas built up will eventually compel things in that direction. The fourth would be, of course, a natural consequence of a consciousness itself aligning with the soul, with the self more and more, and working from a poise closer to that. So from the first, which is easiest for the mind, which is fragmented and disconnected from the self, to the fourth, which requires you to be more and more aligned with the self, you see gradations. And you can go quite far. And if you're working at the same time on the other aspects of the integral yoga, then obviously you're also opening to the self, and more that influence can act through you. When actually you begin to approach that, let's say third and fourth, you will even feel as if I'm doing nothing. You feel the flow, the Shakti works through you, and she works out the circumstances. It happens. It happened. I was conscious that it was aiming for this outcome, but I didn't do anything. She worked through, she did it, etc. So a variation to this, which is also accessible to us, which I would highly recommend for you as a method instead of you trying to do things, because it brings you the best of both, your intention as well as the working from a higher poise of consciousness. So this is the variation I'm going to recommend. Let's say someone is ill. You say, oh, the person should get well. I push. Yes, it's good. Please do. Hold that intention. It will help. Like the person who's praying. But there's more. The person who's praying is also calling for a greater help. But instead of you calling the help with anxiety, you open yourself to the help and invoke the Divine Mother's force, her Shakti, her presence, her love. So initially you will feel it will be through you that it flows to the patient, but better still, invoke directly onto the patient. That's the closest we can, as we are, approach the action which is of the type 3 and 4. Because the Shakti will act directly on the person, will act directly on the nature of the person, will act directly on the circumstances around the person, without the struggling with the limitations that she might have to handle within you when passing through you. Of course, when you become completely a transparent instrument, the distinction ceases. You invoke, it happens. It flowed through you, it flowed directly. Actually, it makes no difference because you're transparent anyway. But you tend more and more towards that direction. So it's an unusual idea for many, because a lot of the modern New Age teaching is you call some help and through you it must act. It's very satisfying for the ego sense. It's much more powerful when it acts directly. You as if invoke and bring directly onto the person or that situation, and then you can let go. And your anxiety is not in the picture to interfere. So these are some suggestions. Narad, you had one more comment. So Narad has typed this question: what of a political group that has all the funds and a collective group that follows and creates evil throughout the world? It is only a question of time for the eradication of this force. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a question of time. When the force acts in this way on circumstances, whatever comes up, even to oppose, eventually will face the squeeze of circumstances. A lot depends also on the grade of the action, the source of the action. In particular, with regard to Sri Aurobindo's action of the supramental force. Just a moment. I think my video froze momentarily. Can you still see? Okay. Can you still see? Okay. Send. Okay. Somehow I'm frozen, but I continue. Narad, you can hear me? No.
Yes, I can now.
Okay. So we
you
continue.
frozen for a few moments.
Okay, perfect. It's come back. The video's come back on my side also. Okay. Something happened with Zoom. So yes, inevitably, I'm going to make a comment that share a comment that the mother made. It's very strong, and I'm not sure if it's politically correct, but the mother said it, so we'll just say that. Mother specifically mentioned two religions in the way as religions, not in the ideology of the religion. And she said, these two will be destroyed because they teach fear of God. We don't need to get into details, but it's as if in the unfolding of circumstances, eventually there will be this crushing of anything which opposes the inevitability of the evolutionary breakthrough and the evolutionary leap. So, of course, the ideology of this fear of God thing being crushed, maybe the core of the religion and its spiritual, mystical element will survive, etc. But the way we know it today, it will undergo a radical change. And just to give an example, so it does not matter if there is a group and however well funded they are, in the way this works, and especially by the compelling circumstances of nature changing and pushing, it takes time, but it will happen. And that's why the mother made this observation generally, that the forces which oppose the divine know that their time is at an end. They know they will lose, which is why they also try more intensely with greater effort to resist and delay. But that's the best they can do, to delay. But we're talking of forces. Human beings can make a choice. And if you choose to follow the forces which delay, well, they get the upper hand. If you choose instead to follow the evolutionary push, that gets the upper hand. And through less struggle, less pain, less chaos, we will come through and circumstances will compel the change. I will draw upon again the example of how technology has forced so much change upon people. The way through internet, we have broken the sense of narrow, even national identities. You may still have a certain identification with your nation, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have another identification, which is with the larger humanity. And maybe 10 years or 15 years ago, there are certain things you could have said, which today you will not be able to say because of that widening that this has compelled. Even if it is a widening at a level which is almost superficially social, still in some part of your consciousness, you've widened enough that it has changed your outlook and your way of relating to people. So by compulsion of circumstances, your consciousness is being forced to widen. And with AI increasingly coming in the way, you'll be forced to tap into parts of your own creativity, which will be deeper and higher by circumstances and so on. Really, when there's action of this kind, especially on the third and fourth kind, and through nature, one of the problems is it takes time because it's working indirectly somewhat, isn't it? So it takes a little time, that's all. And people who are most open and receptive are the first in whom this change is seen. So I'm going to pause here and look at the chat box for anything. There are many other questions which are there which have come in the emails, which I would like to take up. Conservative is asking, how is Bhairava Tattva related to Sri Aurobindo and the mother? Nothing special. It is just one very narrow aspect of a particular aspect of that general consciousness that we know as Shiva. It's very, very narrow, and it's not even of a very high grade. It is a reflection in the vital domains. So not at all important from a spiritual point of view, but for those who live in that grade of consciousness, it's the key entry point for perhaps a higher opening. So I hope that is enough. That satisfies. Kamal says, when we offer to mother how to hear her response, should the psychic being be awake for that? The mistake you make is to hear with your ears. If you're waiting for a voice, voices can be imitated and deceived. You're waiting for a handwriting, it can be imitated. AI can do that now. You can put a fragment of the mother's voice in AI. It'll pick up that and read out any text to you in that voice. AI can do that. Beings can do that. So ignore voices. There's even this warning mother gives. There were many people who said, "Oh, I was praying at the Samadhi and I heard this voice tell me this." And mother says, yeah, precisely. That's where the hostiles will try to give you a wrong suggestion, because you're most open and vulnerable at that point. But you're thinking, I'm at the Samadhi, so it's protected, and it can be only mother's voice if I hear the voice. So her general warning was, do not trust voices, because they can always be imitated and hacked. The only way you will feel directly her response is deep within you in the psychic presence. For that, you do not have to have the psychic being realized. It just means you have to be conscious in the deepest part of you where you know this intimacy with the mother, because that's the natural poise of the psychic consciousness. Feel that part in you where you feel close to the mother, where you feel yourself her child. You feel that intimacy of closeness. Hold yourself there. There you turn in prayer. And there you feel her closeness. Don't wait for words and answers. Feel the closeness. Feel her presence. That's the answer. And then when you are in that alignment, what flows in you and through you will be spontaneously in the right way. Or if something happens which is contrary to that, you will feel there a discomfort. No, I don't think I should do this. It doesn't feel right. I don't want to follow this anymore. And what feels right will be obvious to you. It will come in that way, in the feel of what's right or what's not right, what's mixed or what's true and pure. It will never come in words or instructions. It will come in the feel of the thing itself. And so conservative says, feels very alone and nothing happening when practice of integral yoga, the doubt comes. I would then suggest that you review what you're doing in the practice and look back at that particular, I suggested the sequence from number 82 onwards, where we have looked at the practice and the forms of practice. One of the things in the integral yoga, very special, is that we always move from experience to experience. If nothing is happening, then you really need to question what you're doing. If nothing else, in that intimacy of closeness with the mother, you will feel a great joy, great satisfaction. That itself is something happening. And that closeness growing, for example, would be a very simple measure. If you're waiting for other things to happen, then you need to see what you need to do for those other things then to flower out naturally. Nikhil asks, which Siddhi takes place when psychic joins with Jivatman? It's not about Siddhi. You can be awake in the psychic consciousness and have none of these capacities. These are capacities of nature which has been opened on a higher level. The psychic emergent may or may not have this at all. What will happen is, with the emergence of the psychic influence, you will feel closeness with the divine at all times. And when something is not aligned with the divine presence, with the divine will, you will feel spontaneously uncomfortable. You will feel what is true. You will feel what is mixed. That's all that it will bring. And so it will be like a compass, like a guide pointing you without error at each step. As you continue to refer to it, it will guide you through life. The higher opening to knowledge of intuition must come from the opening of intuition. The psychic will prepare the way for the intuition. The intuition joining with the psychic opening would make for the completeness of the knowledge from that point on, and a surety in the path. Okay, Overmind is asking, why did the mother fall sick and her body became fragile during process of physical transformation when she could have used her siddhis to heal the body? Why did she say that when Sri Aurobindo had the supramental force, he could heal anyone? Absolutely. Why did the mother say when? I thought Sri Aurobindo always had that force. Okay. I was in fact wondering about why that question or when that question would come about the when. So first comment, mother's body became fragile because of biological age. It was not a requirement for the work that she was doing of the physical transformation. It was purely from biological age that the fragility came. But still the question would be, why not use her capacities to heal the body? She did. She did for a long time, maintained the body extraordinarily. Remember, at the age of 80, she was playing tennis with young people in their 20s and defeating them. So the capacity in the body was extraordinary. Even up to 1967, 68, 69, you look at her photos, you would think she's in her 60s. And you would not think that she's in her late 80s at that point. Look at the age of 90, 89, when she starts Auroville. And she's pushing all these people, literally bringing people from all over the world and giving them the impetus to build a whole new city, which may take another 50 years, perhaps. So if you see in her capacity all the way through, it's only at some stage biologically, on some level, that she found the means of what she was trying to do to transform the body, did not receive the support in humanity. And this is a very important point to understand. The work Sri Aurobindo and the mother did on their body was not just for themselves. The goal was, as the avatar, you plug into humanity, and every change you make in your consciousness must ripple out in humanity. You literally drag humanity with you. So this is a comment Sri Aurobindo made. If it was just for their own transformation, they could have done it long ago. But it would have left it disconnected from humanity. So she's pulling humanity with her, and the breakdown she was experiencing also was largely tied to that resistance, that friction from humanity not providing enough support. And so there came a point where she looked at the possibility even of bypassing this by fusing her subtle body with the physical. And she said at that point there was not the divine sanction, and that process she had to let go. The point being, the lack of readiness of humanity, lack of support, lack of participation, which prevented her from completing that work of taking humanity across to that change. For her own body, she could have done it long ago. This was the point, I think, to recognize. To the other question about when Sri Aurobindo had the supramental force, he could heal anyone, absolutely. I will say what I understand from it. At a very general level, it is initially he did not, later he had it. And once he had it, it was there. But there's something else, which is also that at various stages in the sadhana, Sri Aurobindo was working on different planes of consciousness. When he rose to the supramental consciousness, which he did, from there he had the full access, the full action of that power. From that point on, he is bringing it down, infusing it into the mental, into the vital, into the subtle physical, all the way into the physical. Not just in him, but through the mother into humanity. So at that moment, when he is working in these regions, then he is holding the supramental by the tail. That's the phrase he uses. He's pulling it down by the tail, but being here, connecting to that. He could go back to that. Here he has full access. He brings it down. He's holding it by the tail. And at that point, the access is there, but it's in a very specified, narrow, focused connection that is being built. So that's my understanding. I don't think I would want to speculate too much on that, because at the end of the day, it's a question of experience. And this is how the experience is when you're trying to bring down a higher consciousness. You can push from above, you have full access to it. You experience a resistance in the lower part, or you come down into the lower part where there's a resistance and you pull from below. And at that point, you have it as by the tail, but you don't have the full access to its free working. And you're building this link, you're building this bridge. And that's the way it works. But again, the capacity was there. It's just the poise he had taken was not holding it constantly in that poise. I don't have. There's some in a different language. I'm not able to translate. Yes. So Overmind is commenting, just trying to stay connected to the mother, and the whole day went so fast. And a lot of work was done, but it was so quick. And without the mother's consciousness, every second seems so long and painful. Yes, as a general rule, when we feel connected with the divine presence, I'm making a very general statement because not everybody will feel the connection with the mother in this way, in the way you've described. Many will, but for those who don't, it's fine. It's not a problem. You feel connected with the divine presence. You feel close to the divine presence. As long as that is there, life is full of joy and purpose and meaning, and things happen smoothly, joyously, even when there are problems. You don't lose the joy. When the link is broken or you feel the distance with the consciousness, then suddenly the day weighs on you and life becomes hollow, empty, meaningless, purposeless, etc. And notice that it's because you've lost the link. Reconnect with the link and it all comes back. Yes, the Vivekananda Rock Memorial. That's when that event, which was narrated by Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan. I forgot to mention the name. She's the one who was narrating and transmitting the experience. And I said, this is something we should be able to do with an experience of this kind. And for people who have no experience of it, she could still awake in them that experience. And I said, wow, this is a real skill. But at the end of the day, you understand it's a skill. And it is the natural outcome of the ability for you to be able to identify in consciousness, to perceive, but also to infuse in this way. Revati, is there any siddhi to keep close contact with the divine, just as in the physical space? I won't say it is a siddhi. I would simply say it is the part in you where you are already one with the divine is within you. Just become aware of that part. And you maintain that awareness, and with that, the closeness is automatically felt. And you don't have to be fully conscious of your psychic center. The space where its influence is strong is enough. There you feel the closeness with the divine. Not everyone feels it in the heart region, in the emotional or devotional region. Some feel it in the head. Some feel it in the way they flow out in work. I do the work as an offering and I feel great joy because I feel in the work itself the mother's presence and it's being done for her. And that's the point of contact. So where and how you have the point of contact may vary from person to person. But find that, because there's always something in you which has that. Hold that, and that's your way to keep the constancy of the connection. Okay, so EJH is saying, can I change my body and personality with some tapasya, apply pressure on the physical problem or pressure on the brain for more memory or better function? Can we change our own nature with this type of will? Is it the same technique for telekinesis? Yes, it's a very important question. I'm glad you brought it up, because the principle is exactly the same, what we have been reading of application of the will to bring about a change on somebody else's nature or on a person or a situation or a thing. You could also bring it on yourself, on your nature. In fact, this is what we are all the time doing unknowingly. Well, not all the time, because not everyone wants to change oneself. But when you want to change yourself, this is what you end up doing, except that you do it indirectly. What happens? You say, oh, I have a digestion problem, let's say. So I'm going to look up internet, book, why is this happening? What can I do? What are supplements which will help? What is the exercise I can do? And then I start doing the exercise. I start eating the food. I take the supplement. With what? With a one-pointed intention of pressure of will for that particular outcome that I want, isn't it? So in a sense, you're applying a pressure on your nature to shape it. Except you're doing it indirectly. Each time I take the tablet, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to help me overcome my digestion problem, right? Or you say, oh, my body is stiff, I want to make it supple, I want to make it more conscious, I do the stretches. When I do the stretches, I am conscious it is for this intention, and that's the pressure. The mistake we make, so this is still indirect, and I don't see a problem if it's indirect. Remember, that's also one of the methods. The mistake we make is we do not recognize the importance of intensification of the pressure and the tapas. So correction will be for you, build the focus of the tapas. And there's actually a point where when you do it with full attention, full intensity, you'll find rapid breakthroughs happening. Understand, though, sometimes you might have a breakthrough and then it may seem like there's a relapse. Maintain the pressure without disappointment. Hold the faith that it's part of the adjustment of integration. So one part pushed forward rapidly, there was a relapse to allow for integration with the rest, which will now come forward. So you might have a few oscillations. If you understand why, because it means parts are not included in the shift, it comes back to take those parts, and each time there's an oscillation, it's more complete. You keep the sustained pressure without disappointment, without saying, oh, it worked for a few days and then it stopped. No, it didn't stop. Now it's integrating. Sustain the pressure and it'll overcome that more strongly, more completely. Or widen the pressure of intention, the will, to include the parts which you're ignoring currently. Okay, so still this is an effective way. Your will make a difference. The better way would still be, with your will intending this outcome, you consciously open yourself to the higher working of the mother's will and force in you for that outcome, and then for a more general correction, healing, if you want. So you hold this intention, ask for her help, let her flow and fill you, and hold this intention for her working to do more rapidly than your will can do. But your will is participating, holding this while she works, assisting, supporting, holding her consciousness and giving it the freedom to act in you to make that shift. This will be a far more rapid and more direct way of achieving the same result. But yes, you should use the will to change your own nature and to change yourself. So then the question, is it the same technique for telekinesis? Not really. If you mean by telekinesis moving objects, it's not done with this kind of will. Generally, it is done by a projection of your subtle physical substance, which can be pushed by the will, but still it is a projection of that. The way they describe is deceptive. They will say, with his mind, he moved an object. No, he didn't. With his mind, he directed his life force, which directed his subtle physical matter, which projected out of the body and pushed that object. It's not mind acting on matter. It is subtle physical matter acting on subtle physical matter. So the method is different. Rajesh has an interesting experience. I was once playing a game of pool. Every time I held the desire to win in my heart, the game started to turn in my favor. But I felt this action broke my alignment with the divine Shakti. Do you have any insights on this experience? Yes, absolutely. But you see how it works. There's a shift in your consciousness which has the effect on the outcome. So if you felt that it was breaking alignment with the divine Shakti, I would simply say you have a choice at that point. You can say, all right, I will only stay aligned with the working of the Shakti and let her choose. Or you can say, let me see how far this can go and whether from this poise I can find a new alignment with the Shakti. You'll have to feel. You'll have to see which one. If you feel comfortable, I would even experiment with that. How far can I take this? That I make it win. And then from this poise in where I feel, oh, I'm making it win, and I has asserted itself in a way that has broken the link. But that link which I had was from a part of me which was much more passive. This part is more active. Can I build a link from this active part to her? So rather than going back to a passive poise, which is good, but it's not complete, Can I awaken a link with her from my active parts? Probably that would be the correction which might be more useful. Vaibhav says how to heal someone psychologically who have had bad parents and heal their childhood trauma. Yes, it is a more complex question because a lot depends on the person wanting to heal also. And for the person to recognize also the nature of which part the problem exists. There's the couple of, or maybe 3 talks, if I remember right, on the theme of healing childhood trauma. You might want to look at those where the matter has been dealt with more elaborately. But it may not be enough to simply say, I will open myself and it will happen. The reason being, in the parts where the trauma is embedded, you are unable to open yourself. So it will still work, but it will work in a very, 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 very slow process because the part which is closed to the action of the force is refusing actively. And then it's a long process. How can you open that part? If you can, it'll be rapid. But assuming you can't because you're not even conscious of the part, the trauma being such that there's a like a reflex of the muscle tightening. So it's an emotional reflex blocking. And then even the working of the mother's force has to take a long and indirect route. That's where some external devices can be helpful to begin the opening process. And initially it would be just becoming conscious and then slowly, gradually doing this movement of opening. For that, a skilled person who understands this process also, the spiritual process, can be a helpful guide externally. Tutun says, even you did when you spoke on Sri Ramakrishna, the talk on YouTube, your experience at Belur Mutt. Yes, in fact, that was my inspiration with that experience I had with Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan. That's when I realized that, and the group which was with me and listening to that incident were coming from a very crude, coarse, superficial background, and all of them were touched by the thrill. And I said, if this is possible, then one should be able to do this. And of course, one can take it much more and much, much more, even transmitting to the point where even in certain spiritual experiences can be shared in a way that it evokes in the listeners the, at least partially, or even the full impact of that experience. And all that one should be able to develop if you so feel called to develop that side. So Mahesh is asking, we are normally influenced by nature and its tendencies and need to put a lot of will and effort to rise above it and connect to the divine. Does this mean nature is generally an inhibitory force? We have to be careful of the vocabulary we use now. There is such a thing as a lower nature, and there is such a thing as a higher nature. So the lower nature is inhibitory to any upward movement, to any rapid upward movement, correct? It has its own routine, very slow, spiral, wandering, and slowly growing. That's lower nature. That's what Sri Aurobindo calls the unconscious yoga of nature. And it'll take a few thousand years, maybe a million years to get to somewhere. When you try to rise more rapidly or push forward or accelerate the change in your nature, it resists that. Lower nature resists that. But higher nature is already what you're trying to realize. That helps your effort. And that's why it is so critical for you at that point, literally to abandon this part which opposes and resists temporarily and open to that part which is working to manifest, and particularly the working of the force of the Divine Mother, who works through the higher nature. And when she fills the lower nature, so I said temporarily you abandon to open to that, but then you infuse that into this lower. When she fills lower nature, she awakens in it consciousness and plasticity and the change. That's the most rapid way. So if you understand this now, difference between the two, nature is helping you. Higher nature is helping you. Lower nature is resisting too rapid a change. But the higher nature already is what you're seeking. And it's the link between this, and your will is the means by which the two will be linked. And I think if that makes sense, you will see it can be very rapid. Okay, so Rajarshi says, thanks for the explanation. I feel as if I hold an attitude that is less selfish, such as I will not let you win unless you really deserve it, I'm able to better maintain the alignment. Yes, but I'm not happy with this attitude. This attitude is still too moralistic. It still comes with the assumption that somehow to want to win is selfish. Not necessarily. Try, for example, a variant of this where you say, I would like to win so that the divine force can use this winning for a greater purpose. Within you, bring this idea that in winning, it will be amplification of the divine force in you, and it will use the consequences of winning, whatever that is, for amplifying its working in circumstances. There need be nothing in contradiction to it. Your sense of I winning or I not winning, selfish, all those become irrelevant. Selfishness, even the idea of selfishness, comes from a very narrow poise of consciousness. When the divine works through you and creates abundance and uses that abundance for its own work, and you are being used, you don't say, I'm being selfish by winning so much for the divine. You just let go of that. These are very narrow moral structures. Let it all dissolve. She works in you and through you, and whatever outcome through the winning will be her work also. Take it through to completion for that. Then you might find it's actually a relief to let go of all these false boundaries and false walls in which we tend to lock ourselves morally and ethically. Dissolve it all and let her work freely. You'll find you are lifted. Even your sense of selfishness will suddenly become, will find great joy in sharing and giving and assisting a larger outcome. And by the way, just so you know, sometimes the winning being used for your own comfort is also justified for mother's work in you and for your life, isn't it? There's this incident, somebody was flying from the ashram and he was going for some work for the mother. And someone complained to mother, he's going by business class. So mother said, why can't my children travel in comfort? If it's given to you, yes, you take it. If it's not given to you, you manage with what's available. That's also part of the working. You don't have to be living in poverty to be spiritual. You should not be wasting the money or using it wrongly. That's a different story. But what is right use? And sometimes right use may include comforts also. And so what that will be, that's why I'm not putting too much of a form to it. I'm rather saying allowing her working in you. And sometimes it will be for your comfort also. Sometimes it will be for helping others also. And both are justified. If you look at yourself as objectively as you look at others, if helping someone is good, helping this body, this person is also good when it's needed, isn't it? And so it's rather the poise of consciousness which looks at it with greater equality and not too narrowly personal, that will be the correction. Okay. Okay, conservative says, when referring to opening to the mother and Sri Aurobindo, I feel like a concrete block, not a single bit of opening what to do. When I try consciously, it feels like it becomes more hard. I will say the approach you're doing is wrong then. The effort you're making is creating itself a block. Instead, find the part in you that already loves them or adores them. You're trying to fit it into the box of a certain expectation which is not working. Maybe you're trying to feel in your emotion a devotional fervor. No, that's not it. There's a very quiet, deep stillness within you with no fervor, no agitation, where you just feel yourself simply like a child or close to the divine. If you feel that, hold that. No drama of emotions. Or if you don't feel that, in your very question, we can already feel in your mind, there's a part which turns in adoration, which wants to feel this closeness. That's your point of closeness in mind. And hold in mind, Sri Aurobindo and the mother are, that's it. This is the part where the closeness is felt. Hold this. Sometimes it'll be in action. I'm doing this, I'm offering flowers, I'm arranging something, or I'm doing my work, and somewhere I have the idea that with this, whatever I do, I'm doing as an offering. Maybe it's in that. So in your case right now, it seems to be more in this part of some part of the higher emotionless, deeper feel or mind where you have this. Just hold that. There is no drama, there is no agitation, there is no excitation. It's a still, quiet sense of closeness. Stay in it, immerse in it, deepen into it more and more in that stillness and calm and peace, and a quiet joy that fills that calm and peace. And then a deep sense of satisfaction that comes. Again, no emotion felt anywhere, and that's fine. It's not an emotional experience. And you stay in that sense of deep satisfaction. And when you're in that fully immersed, it's as if nothing matters. It's so full. And then from there, slowly you will turn to face your life and say, I'm going to live the rest of my life from this poise. That will be the way you make your first few steps. The rest will then follow as a consequence. But this poise, this state already exists. Just be aware of it. It's not the way you expected it. Forget your expectations. Stay with what you experience as it already is. Does that make sense? Don't think of opening and forcing something open. Simply become aware of the part which already adores and feels close. Okay. Stay with that. So I think we'll take this as a point of pause. The text-wise, I'm just going to read the next one in the first line, so we'll have continuity for next time. We looked at the working of Aishwara, and next is Ishita. Sri Aurobindo says, Ishita is the same effectiveness of the will, acting not as a command or through the thought by ajnanam, but through the heart or temperament in a perception of need or pure lipsa. That is, you're just quietly, you feel the need for this and it happens without an exercise of will in this way, without the thought, without the command. It's simply, oh, there's a need, and the rippling effect happens and the circumstance. So the way he has structured it here, first Aishwarya, then Ishita, because Ishita is taking Aishwarya movement and just from a pure aspiration and need, and the work is done. So how that works, how it happens, we will look at next time. I think it's worth it going in depth like this because it gives a chance also to put into practice some of these things. Remember, for practice purpose, Aishwarya, the one-pointedness of your consciousness, the gathered focus of the tapas and the pressure that it builds without internal contradictions. Take up something very specific which is requirement of your work for an outcome that you have to anyway work for. So it's not contrary, it's not something taking where you might feel moralistic or other issues. Align it with a work that's already given to you that you have to do. And as if in your consciousness, you put an intention for all the materials to be gathered for the outcome to happen in the most rapid and smooth way. I remember at one point when I was in a very deep state of alignment with the psychic presence because of the way my teacher MP Pandit was infusing that experience in me. It was for a period of, I don't know, nearly a year or a little more. I remember at that point, in the morning, I said, oh, today I have to meet 3 people. That was the work I had to do. I had to meet X, Y, Z. And in my mind, I thought, oh, for X, I'd have to go there, then I have to go to Y. Then I stopped thinking. And I said, I have just to meet, held the intention X, then Y, then Z. I stepped out of the house and X was cycling by. I stopped him, finished the work. I walked to the corner on the way to the ashram and Y was standing there. I finished the work. And a few minutes later, I met Z and it was done. I don't even remember who they were now. The detail was not important, but the smoothness and ease with which the things fell into place, I said, wow, this is so beautiful. I wish every day could be like that. But it was the natural outcome of that poise, of that state, without even an imposed will. It was much closer to the Ishita state. But it was easy and natural because the consciousness was at that moment, for that period, very closely, easily centered, close to that presence. But the same thing you could do with a slight intention of the will. We will say, okay, this needs to be done, that needs to be done. Don't fix too rigidly the circumstances. Hold the intention and put very quietly, in stillness and calm, a certain pressure for that outcome. Maintain equality, no anxiety, no contrary thought, feeling, or impulse, and then release it. Release it so that you have no more anxiety. But that state of focused intention you hold, give it its purpose, and then release it. And then go about your day, holding the general sense that this needs to be done, but without any particular sustained pressure. Experiment with this, and you'll find it works very smoothly, very easily. Things happen, they get worked out around you spontaneously. A superior way would be you do this and invoke the mother's help and say, help me for this outcome. Again, at a general level, don't go into too much detail, precise. You may play with that if you want to explore. I want it to happen exactly in this way. But in the beginning, at least, get used to the idea of a general outcome, general purpose, focus, and asking for the mother's help. Make this happen. And so in the invocation of her consciousness, there's a much wider action, which is larger than what your will and the pressure you could have brought. But something greater, grander, more comprehensive comes, often with an outcome more than you could have conceived, more smooth and more beautiful. So this is something you could explore and experiment with. And increasingly, the goal should become for you to become transparent so that what she chooses, what she wills, more and more will work out. But initially, your choice has to lead the way. And your higher part, your higher choice. I think we'll leave this as a homework for those who would like to explore this. And we'll continue this topic next time. Let's take a moment to concentrate. We looked at many examples of what Sri Aurobindo and the Mother did for humanity, particularly this whole massive turn that they brought about in the destiny of humanity and the whole turn towards the next step in human evolution, and a massive shift. And all the other dreams which Sri Aurobindo has spoken of, which also he worked for in this way, beginning with India's freedom, the rise of Asia, and awakening, worldwide awakening to the higher spiritual possibilities, India's gift of spirituality to the world, and then the next step in human evolution. All these things he worked for, and he has put the pressure is still on, it's still working, and the consequences we will see rapidly over the next 100, 200 years, which in evolutionary terms is very rapid. People say again and again, oh, in the last 100 years, humanity has grown so much, not realizing it's the outcome of the avatar's action on humanity. Nowhere before you see that kind of rapidity of change, isn't it? And now in the last 5 years, you've woken up, humanity has woken up much more than in the last 50 years. And that's also because of this pressure working. So just recognize that this is not something which we have done. We have not even tried. We would rather have gone to sleep and lived in the past. But it is the action of the working of the force and the will that Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have infused on humanity to lift us up. And to be conscious of this allows us to open consciously and then, of course, participate more rapidly. But at the very least, we can be grateful. And in gratitude, let's concentrate for a moment. Namaste.